I decided to become an architect after I'd already started college. When I was young, I grew up in Oklahoma, and there were no architects anywhere near where I lived. And I had no idea that that was a viable profession for a woman. My dad always said, you can be whatever you want to be, which for a woman in the 1950s and 60s was kind of unusual. And so I decided to be an engineer. And I went to Rice University, and I was an engineer for about a semester. And then I had a friend who was an architect, and she would carry around triangles, and she would have drawings, and I thought, well, you know, let me think about that. So they let me in the architecture school, which they don't usually let people in without, you know, drawings and portfolios and things like that. But I'd already passed muster as an engineering student, so they let me in. Architecture school was very difficult. I think that as a woman, I was in a class of 25 people, and there were 3 women at that time. I started school in 1971. And so it was especially difficult for women because they were harassed. We were harassed by fellow students, we were harassed by the faculty, and of the 3 women that started with me, I'm the only one that finished. When I'm talking about harassment, I'm talking about a couple of things. One is outright harassment, so you stand up in front of people for a review, and you know how reviews are in front of juries are very tense, and they're very difficult. But I would get harassed in addition to that. The professor would make fun of my miniskirt, or, you know, of the way I was standing, or what I had decided to wear. And there was another way of harassment, which is that they just didn't give me any attention. So I had professors who didn't really believe that women should be in architecture school, and so they wouldn't really come to your desk and give you a crit. Or when they did, they would just kind of humph and turn away. So the fact that I hadn't worked construction in the summer, or that I didn't know how to draft, were things that played against me all the time. I didn't learn how to draft because they wouldn't let me take drafting class when I was in the 8th grade. I had to take homemaking. So there were sort of these obstacles in the way of doing what I wanted to do at every turn. And it became, after a while, a kind of challenge. Like, I'm going to show those guys. I am going to be what they think I cannot be. I was very interested in urban design and became, and so that's the field I sort of chose to go into. I primarily worked in nonprofit organizations, little planning organizations in Houston, and that's the kind of business I was into. I eventually decided that really wasn't making it. So I was interested in becoming a real estate developer. I worked in real estate development for a couple of years, and then I moved to Boston with my husband. He had a job, and I was a housewife for 2 or 3 years because my daughter was born, and but that sort of didn't work out for me because I really was not happy doing that. I really wanted to work. I wanted meaningful work outside of the home. I was already trained to do that. And again, there was a kind of an obstacle. People would tell me, well, you know, you haven't worked in a while. Why would we give you a job? You know, what do you know how to do? You know, can you do door schedules? Can you do any of those things, which I hadn't had any experience doing sort of regular architecture. So I had a difficult time sort of figuring out what I wanted to do. I eventually went to work for the city of Boston, which was a really interesting job, working in the neighborhoods of Boston and working for what was called the Public Facilities Department. It was basically neighborhood development. And we we would go into a small neighborhood and go into their business district and work with people and give them loans and do design work for their facades. And it was also my first opportunity to be the boss, because they hired me to run this small department of people, 6 people. And it was exciting for me, and I had a wonderful time, and I got some state grants, and I had a great staff, mostly people from Harvard or from MIT, and so there were, it was a great opportunity to be in the mix of some really wonderful people during a very volatile time when neighborhood development was a difficult subject in Boston. So after having done that for a few years, I applied for a fellowship at Harvard, the Loeb Fellowship, which is a pretty well-known honor, and it also includes a year of study at Harvard. It was really a tremendous change in my whole ability to see myself and understand myself, which I think is what Harvard sort of intends. It was such a great experience to be with both would be with the people that I was with as fellow Loeb Fellows, many of whom went on to really great things, and also to have the experience of being at the Harvard GSD and all of the incredible faculty that they have there. That really, it really elevated my game. At Harvard, I really learned about architecture as a field of ideas, and a field of philosophy, and a field of sort of an expansive revelation about human life. It really helped me to see myself and to be more of an academically minded person, and to see architecture more broadly and more as a thing which was such an important cultural touchstone in our lives. It really does change your perspective. I decided, wow, it would be so great to be a professor, because I had a lot of knowledge and I had a lot of things to give, and I also had this 15-year record of experience in actually working in the field. So I went to the dean of the Harvard Graduate School, who just happened to be a person that was a professor of mine back at Rice. And I said, I want to be, I want to be a professor. And he didn't laugh or anything. He said, sure, He said, I have these 3 things on my desk, which one do you want to do? And he just called up the people, and I got interviews. And of course, knowing nothing about academic interviews, I just, they called me and want to come interview, and I said, sure, how about tomorrow? I'll fly out tomorrow, because this is the way business does business. Well, academics don't do it that way. They have a 3 or 4 day interview where you have to talk to every single person on the faculty individually, and then you have to talk to the students as a group, you have to talk to the alumni as a group, you have to talk to the donors as a group, and so, and you have to give a talk. So when I landed at the airport, the professor who met me said, oh, we're so looking forward to your talk. And I'm like, what talk? And this was not the time when you could actually go to your computer, pull up your talk and put it on, put up whatever you were doing. This was a time when, you needed to have your slides all set out, and I had nothing. So when I was talking to the graduate students, I told them my dilemma, and they said, well, we have your portfolio here. Let us make some overhead projector slides for it. And they did, and I did the interview, and they offered me the job that day, which is also, in academia, unheard of. And I found out later it was really late in the season to be trying to decide to be, and at that point in time, people were desperate for people for the next year. And I was the only woman, again, it was kind of an advantage, that was interviewing as an urban designer, and so that worked out. So I went to the University of Cincinnati. I was a professor of urban planning, which was a very good position to be in. My experience as a professor was great. Everyone helped me a lot. The students were terrific. I had great experiences there. I I had some collaborations where I began to write, and I worked with people to write 2 books, and I wrote a lot of articles, so I had some publication experience, and I met my partner, who we established a practice in architecture, and I was able to do, finally, a few buildings, and also to work on many urban design projects around Ohio and Indiana and Kentucky. So that was my experience at the University of Cincinnati, but I was really ready to take a leadership position after about 12 years there. So I ended up interviewing here at the University of Utah for the dean position, which was kind of unusual because I actually hadn't been a department chair or anything like that. I had that leadership position in Boston, but I hadn't otherwise done that work in academia. But again, it felt really right to be here. It was a very small department at the time. There were 12 faculty members. There were 180 students. And it was in a giant building. You know, we had oodles of space. People were just like gobbling desks all over the place, and faculty were taking up, 1.5 office spaces. I mean, it was a very small program in a fairly large building. When I first came, it was a fairly small department, and it had been very well run by Bill Miller, who was the previous dean, and had lots of great connections with what we called the downtown architects, which were the architects of the local architects in Utah. But it was pretty much unseen, I think, beyond the architecture community, unseen in the general community. As soon as I came, one of the first things that really happened was that I tried to, I wanted to have an urban planning degree program. And it turns out there was an urban planning degree program. It was a program in geography. It had 1 professor. So with his blessing, we went ahead and managed to move that program to the college. We renamed it from the Graduate School of Architecture to the College of Architecture and Design, which was very pretentious at that time because the College of Architecture and Planning, because it really wasn't that yet. But we started an urban planning program which blossomed very well over the next 5 or 6 years and gained a lot of national notoriety. We hired some of the very best urban planners in the country, and it has still become it is still a very well-known program. And the architecture faculty were really supportive of this particular thing, and this is something they wanted as well. The architecture faculty were so supportive that they ended up teaching some of the classes, and they did all of the hiring committees for all of the people that actually ended up being hired. And it was a very collaborative experience for everybody. At the same time, I was encouraging the faculty and the adjunct faculty too to become far more involved in larger issues than just the architecture community, the art community. And of course with the planners coming on board, we became involved in the planning community. I went on the board of 5 or 6 organizations that like Envision Utah and ArtSpace, and encouraged my faculty to do the same. And they were on the Preservation Utah board, and they were on the Planning Commission and so forth. So we really reached out as an organization and became much more widely. It became something we were much more widely known in the community because of these efforts by myself and the faculty. We also encouraged the students to get involved. I was there as a dean for about 11 years, and then I continued on in the faculty for another 6 years or so. So I was, so during my time as dean, the place changed tremendously. Not only did we change the name, of course, but we added the urban planning program, we added the real estate development program as a partnership with the business school, we added the, finally the most important addition probably was the multidisciplinary design program. So we added historic preservation certificates, urban design certificates. So there was a number of initiatives that kind of went through, and it was all a lot of change over a period of years, but it was quite a bit of change. It was very, very dynamic. That was something that I think is one of my greatest life accomplishments, was to introduce all of these interesting programs, to try to make them work together, to turn the college into a real college with multiple departments instead of just a single department college, and to give students the opportunity in Utah to design and do things that they had never had the opportunity to do. When I see a urban planner now, many of the urban planners that I work with today in this city or in other places were products of the urban planning program. And I am so proud of those people. It almost makes me tear up, because they would not have had the chance to do that, to have those jobs, to have those extremely meaningful jobs. Many of them are, they lead the small town. They go straight, not straight, but they go almost straight from their master's degree into being the planner for a town. Utah had no resource like that before I came to be dean, and before the faculty and I put that program together. The design program was also developed to be a community resource. Some of the first projects that we did were things like designing a prosthetic for someone who wasn't able to actually have a high-tech kind of prosthetic. So we did like low-tech prosthetic limbs as one of the first design projects. We had partnership with the medical school. We had partnerships with business school. We had partnerships in economics. So it was really a kind of interesting time to be there, and I was very proud of the things that I did. And after 10 years, I'm sort of evaluating and going, well, maybe it's time to move on. This is cranking away. We have some really good leaders coming up, and so that motivated me to kind of say, let's go a little lower key for a while. So I went off the faculty and not went off the faculty. I stepped down as dean and went into the faculty and did a lot more things that had to do with writing and getting back to my research work and getting back to more focus on my community work. And I also did some travel and taught in South Korea in a program we had there at the U. So it was a good experience. I have still been writing. I've published a number of papers. I organized a big international conference. I'm part of a research group internationally. I have been very involved in the local planning commission, Salt Lake City Planning Commission. I've been on the Planning Commission for 7 years now and have been chair of that. I've been in the Utah Women's Forum. I've worked with the Girl Scouts. I was their chair for a year, 4 years. I get a lot of personal travel in, and that's exciting too. I'm really most proud of my children. I have 2 beautiful daughters, and they are both accomplished in their own ways. And I think I'm proud that they think of me as an accomplished mom. I think I set a tone for them growing up that said, you know, you can be what you want to be, and that doesn't mean that you have to be in charge of everything. It means that you can be what you want to be, which I think is a very important message that we have to send to women. I'm proud that I was able to be a role model for women architects in Utah. We started out not having a lot of women architecture students. Dean Miller had worked pretty hard on that issue, actually. But it still, I think, helped a lot to have more of a role model in place there. I'm also proud of what I accomplished at the university. The number of programs that were increased, the increasing ability of students to study lots of different things that they were before. And that's a really, and it's important not only for the students, it's also important for the state of Utah to have those resources available to it. I'm proud of my research work, which I don't think gets a lot of attention, but I have done a lot of research on urban morphology, which is the study of the history of cities. So even while I was singing, I was doing a lot of work in that area. I've written 40 or 50 papers. I've done 3 books at this point, and I have written a great article about Salt Lake City. I really would have liked, I think, to actually have been an architect in the sense of actually being able to design buildings. I mean, I did a little bit of it, but I did it in partnership with people who really did most of the work. And I think sometimes I regret that I didn't have that chance. I never thought I was very good at design until much later in my career when I actually found out that I was really good at design. Going back to, you know, my initial introduction in architecture school, where I was actually quite kind of discouraged, I never really realized that I could do that. Well, I think the evolution of practice has been really devoted to more and more computer-aided activities, which is kind of disappointing in a way. Not that it's not great to have computers, it does cut out some of the grunt work. On the other hand, I've never noticed that it's actually taken less time to do anything. Anything you do with the computers ends up taking almost as much time. So hopefully it's more accurate and so forth. But I think, unfortunately, that has had a kind of effect, certainly on architecture schools and probably on the profession, in that students don't really know how to draw anymore, and they don't know how to think with their hands as much, because they're going instantly from some little diagram right into the computer, and the computer makes everything look beautiful. And everyone wants their drawing to be beautiful right from the very beginning. So there's a real emphasis on the beauty of the drawing. I remember going to a conference not too long ago, and a person was showing the urban design work of her students, and I said, you know, it's very clear to me that your students know how to design a presentation, but do they know how to design a street? You know, because the infographics were amazing. You know, everything you could possibly want to know about that area was in an infographic. And they were beautifully and graphically designed. But I think we lose something when everything has to be perfect immediately. When you can't just rip and tear a model, where you can't just sketch 100 different times. It is the desire to be perfect right out of the bag that I think hurts the development of a design. So I don't think we see as much creativity as we could in architecture. Travel, go to concerts, to get out of the architecture mindset and into the cultural mindset. So you are not just stuck doing architecture things in architecture courses, in architecture about, you know, everything, not the architecture focus that we tend to do with students, but actually, you know, to send people off to actually go to the museum, look at art, you know, talk about art, read everything, you know, read all kinds of different things. So I think the biggest advice I could give to architecture students is to be the everyman that they need to be in order to really do it well.